Hello and welcome to the Rational Standard podcast, a special episode before South Africa's life-changing, country-changing elections, as all the elections seem to be. Local government elections coming up on the 1st of November. Hopefully you've got a chance to listen to this before you go and cast your ballot, because of course we'll give you political advice, ideological advice, tell you who to vote for, make all of your decisions for you. That's what we're here for. To start off with, Hermann Pretorius, we're also joined by Mr. Martin van Staden. I will link all of their respective publications, tabs, everything else below. Unfortunately, Herman doesn't have a Twitter anymore, so what's the point really of anything in this life? But Herman, not to bury the lead, the African National Congress, how well are they going to do in the local government elections 2021?
Well, so my colleagues at the Institute of Race Relations have made a gutsy call that the ANC is going to fall beneath 50% or below 50%, and I think that's wrong. I just think that's wrong. The ANC has an ability to have in the final weeks of an election campaign. They are known for their squeeze tactics. They have this. It's a standard tactic and maneuver, as it were, of the ANC in an election campaign, is that they are quite disorganized and quite chaotic up to a point, and in the final week or two, even 3 weeks, they pivot to a squeeze. And you always see this happening, whether you follow the internal pollings of these various parties, or if polling is available, whether it's on national or provincial level. You always get the ANC, eking out between 3 and 6 percentage points, improving their standing in the last few weeks. So I think we'll see an ANC squeeze that will push it probably above 50%, which would be sad. I mean, it would be a great psychological victory, or just not victory, but just step forward, just an announcement that the paradigm can shift for the ANC to fall beneath 50% in an election, a nationwide, representative proportion. But the thing is that where Fikile Mbalula a few weeks ago said the ANC is planning to spend 50 million rand, I mean, you can take that and you can times it by, almost six, and you get the true amount of money that they're going to spend. They're probably going to spend closer in the area of 300 million. So don't believe the 50 million headline figure. However, the 300 million is still significantly less than the 1 billion rand they reportedly spent in the 2016 elections. So I think when it comes to the ANC, they have a good turnout machinery. The machinery is showing signs of strain, of course, but it's still quite prominent. It's still quite formidable, and they have the biggest campaigning budget in the country. So I do think between now and the election campaign, we'll probably see the ANC starting to do the squeeze maneuver, pushing them from the high 40s to the low 50s.
Martin, the ANC, I mean, they've really punted President Ramaphosa as the party leader, and he seems to be the sort of quote unquote success story that they're trying to base their messaging on. And his charisma, at least, I don't know, maybe they need to do more campaigning in Sea Point, and then they can actually win the election, because he does do quite well when he goes for a jog there. So maybe that's a better strategy for them. But do you think that's going to pay off for them, sort of riding the Ramaphosa ticket, as it were? I know we often talk about US politics, obviously, as it's so character and personality based, but I think the same could apply in South Africa.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely going to play a role. The ANC, I think a lot of people in our corner broadly have now come out and said that Jacob Zuma was the best hope for South Africa in many ways, in that his persona and his very I guess glaring corruption and so on was really going to tank the ANC at some stage. His total lack of regard to the damage he is doing. In Ramaphosa, you definitely have a different person. You have someone who really comes across as sincere and against corruption, and there's still this air of he's this reformer and he's gonna right the ship, even though he's been president now for it's about 3 years, 4 years, something like that. more. And he's been at the very top of the ANC establishment for far longer. So none of that is true, of course. But he does have that positive vibe around him that I guess could get people out to vote. Now, I guess the hope really is on the increasing pool of non-voters in South Africa. One would hope that is where the ANC is really losing people who came out in 2016 and cast a vote for the ANC, and now they just said, well, I got an ANC council last time I voted. I still don't have access to water. I still don't have refuse removal services. So what's the point of voting this time? One hopes that is the case. So I have no basis on which to agree or disagree with Hermann or the IRR, but I guess I'm just hoping that this is the point where the ANC falls below 50. Now, I'm not sure what the relevance of that necessarily is in a municipal election. It's not like we're determining the share of parliament now. Each municipality is its own mini election essentially, so that's where the real focus should be. So I guess one would have to have regard to the main hubs of economic growth in South Africa, or those which have the potential to be hubs of economic growth: Johannesburg, Durban, Cape Town, Pretoria, and see what's happening there. And I guess that's
Not Pretoria though.
yeah, well, especially Pretoria, the very center of South Africa's emancipation. So
Sorry, Chris, I couldn't hear you over that noise of the administrative capital.
yeah. So yeah, I guess that's where we should look. I guess look at the metropolitan municipalities. There, it's the ANC and has been on the has gone below 50%. So one would now want to see the ANC losing more votes, and also see the EFF losing more votes. But that's a dream that I have that I know is unfortunately not going to pay off. And maybe force these municipalities into some unstable coalitions. And I emphasize unstable. You do not want stable coalitions, because then that kind of undermines the whole point of having coalition politics. You do want them to constantly check one another, and if they don't do what needs to be done, the coalition should collapse. So yeah, and Ramaphosa he's their ticket. He's the face on their on their posters during a municipal election. I mean, the DA is also doing this. John Steenhuisen's face is on many DA posters, which I find very very bizarre. And the EFF has also been doing this. I haven't seen one EFF poster that has a mayoral candidate's face on it, or a ward candidate's face on it. I've seen a few DA, a few. I haven't seen that with the Freedom Front either, the Freedom Front Plus. It's also just been Peter Groenewald's face. So yeah, it's almost like we're having a mini national election now. So yeah, but Ramaphosa is the ANC's the big gun that they're rolling out. So let's see what happens. Let's see if South Africans are smart enough this time to see through the lie.
Hermann, you've probably commented on this in different contexts, but just for the RS listeners, is there a straightforward answer for why people keep on voting ANC? Is it a multifaceted sort of point? Is it, I guess, loyalty, something? I mean, the liberation point is presumably still quite strong. I thought to give you a chance a little bit on that, because people, I mean, a lot of people often say, well, just look, because the lights are out, there's load shedding, look at the credit rating, how can you still vote ANC? And I think it doesn't help you understand why people vote certain ways to just say, oh, well, it's just low IQ or whatever.
Yeah, no, I get very annoyed with that sort of lazy analysis, just, low IQ voters. I get extremely frustrated by people on our side of the ideological divide when they are incredibly dismissive of the voters en masse. Now, I think there is a permissible amount of dismissiveness that one can have, but I really despise the lazy thinking of just assuming that people are unthinking. And one of the reasons I say this is, when you look at the 63% that the ANC got in 1994, that was representative of 54% of eligible voters. So of all the people who could have voted in the country, the ANC got the support, according to the results, I mean, that's a whole different discussion, of 54%. Compare that to the 2019 elections, where they got 57%, excuse me, 57% of the vote, and that's representative of less than 29% of the vote. So what's actually happened is not that the ANC support has been static; it's been proportionally static. I mean, it's only dipped 6 percentage points actually in the superficial data. But the ANC has lost millions of voters due to loss of faith in electoral activity. And there's this very interesting inverse correlation. If you look at the decline in voter participation and the increase in service delivery protests over the last decade, where service delivery protests have gone up by 440%. So we are looking at people still being faced with the societal community problems, service delivery problems that they were faced with 10 years ago. They've just lost faith in the ballot box as a way to address those points. They've taken to other political, non-democratic or non-electoral means, but they are still participating and probably more aware of the shortcomings of ANC service delivery than the three of us would be. So why do people still vote for the ANC? Well, some of it is because is the Liberation Party. They voters tend to be older, 55 and above. Then there is just the fact that why do people keep voting ANC? Well, in a way, they don't keep voting ANC. They've lost millions of voters now, to the great embarrassment and shame of opposition parties. Those voters haven't found an alternative home politically. But it's not as simple as to say that why do people keep on voting for the ANC? But also, then there is something, and I think this was said by Richard Spoor once. The ANC, with its patronage network, almost functions as a bit of a lottery, that you keep on buying that ticket because your patronage ship might come. You might get the Tatama chance and therefore the Tatama millions, where as long as you stay loyal, you can get access to the feeding trough. So I do think that there is some cynical voters that play the ANC patronage lottery in that way. I think that's part of the reason why they support the ANC stubbornly. But then there's also, of course, the fact that for all the efforts of non-racialists, politics is still defined racially. In South Africa, the media bears a lot of blame for this. Musi Maimane bears a lot of blame for this. Helen Zille bears a lot of blame for that. You can take this even back to Tony Leon. And I'm, shooting at people on my own side here. People, at least Helen and Tony Leon, have really, I think, seen the errors of their ways and are now trying to rectify it. But there is still this idea that the ANC is the party for black people. If you're black, then that is statistically still one of the strongest determiners in South Africa of voting behavior, is race. And as long as us classic liberals, libertarians, capitalists, whatever you want to call us, this family of ideological conviction, as long as we can't break through that, I think we are in a way screwed in this downward trajectory of stable ANC support. And in this regard, I'm very, very curious about the Zambian elections, and I've been trying to speak to people in the UPND campaign as to how did they manage to make the Zambian election, the presidential election of a few months ago, not about tribal politics and ethnic politics, because South Africa has race. Zambia had ethnicity, with the Patriotic Front stayed in government because it had the support of, the ethnic majority. But then in this last election, you saw, anti-ethnic voting almost, where the tribes took secondary interest or secondary priority to the national interest. And I'm very, very curious as to how a classically liberal, perhaps more conservative, more socially conservative strain of classic liberalism, but still classic liberalism, managed to get 57% of the vote in an African country that has been under socialist rule for 22 years. So I do think that there's hope, and I do think that it can be done right. But the tragedy is that people still vote ANC for those reasons: loyalty, the patronage lottery. Well, let me add another category of loyalty, not just loyalty on liberation, but loyalty on the 10 years of good service delivery that this country saw between 1997 and 2007. Those were good, objectively good economic years, with warts, but still pretty good, and service delivery boomed in that time. So you have these factors, and then of course the race factor, which is tragic. So I think collectively you can find some reason in that. And an interesting point about Ramaphosa as the poster, the banner carrier for the ANC, he is objectively, according to the opinion polls I've seen from some of the internal parties and from the Institute of Race Relations, he is their strongest electoral asset. He has an approval rating of 60%. Even now, 49% of South Africans strongly approve of him, and 11% approve of him. So he still is popular, and I think that is why they play to their strengths. I mean, for all their ills, the ANC aren't completely idiots. So if you have an electoral asset, use it. And I think that's what's happening with Ramaphosa.
Although, if I can just quickly add on that, I mean, the point you made in the beginning, Herman, I think bears emphasizing, in that the ANC is effectively a minority government, and that's something that's not often remembered by the opponents of the ANC. There is this impression, and I'll speak plainly. It's mostly from white South Africans who we engage a lot, who say, yeah, the majority of South Africans, black people, are voting for their own doom. The fact is that's simply not the case. That's not the reality. The ANC governs with a relatively small minority of eligible voters. So if you see people voting age, black poor people, the chances that there is nothing that necessarily says they vote ANC. That's definitely not a given, and this is something that going forward, really as a general rule, I think people should do well to remember. And I always come back to the IRR's research in this respect that really shows that by far most South Africans across color lines really get along very well, and very few people really become victims of the ANC and their friends in the EFF's racial narratives to push this idea that there's white monopoly capital and blacks should just hate whites, and that doesn't find purchase amongst the rank and file of ordinary South Africans. The ANC governs with a core of and all the reasons you've mentioned, Arman, sound very, very about right to me. That's a core of people that they've grabbed onto and who will probably keep on voting for the ANC. But increasingly at the edges, I think people who will fall away and probably not vote at all. So the value of the ballot box is to be doubted. But hopefully they will come to the ballot box and give their vote to another party. But you make a very strong point about the lack of alternatives. And I mean, this really jumped at me in the context of this municipal election, in that I read a few articles. I haven't read all the manifestos, but I read a few articles summarizing the various parties' manifestos, and I was like, this is the same manifesto. This is all the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. The DA obviously can say we've actually implemented some of this stuff. It works. So there is that. But no one really has a different vision. The only two things that jumped out at me was the EFF said that they I can't believe this, but they said they want to establish special economic zones in the municipalities that they govern, where there will be no taxes and none of that. And I was like, okay, that's interesting.
They fight for economic freedom.
Yes, suddenly they do. And the Freedom Front also wants special economic zones in their municipalities. But other than that, everyone says the same things. We want to fix broken water pipes. We want to keep the lights on. We want to capacitate the metro police. We want everyone wants their municipal councillors now to sign ethics statements or something that if they do something, they'll be fired or something, presumably. But everyone is saying the same thing. There's no alternative vision, and a lot of people come with the story of like, Martin, seriously, with your classical liberal idealism, this is a local election. Service delivery is what matters here. No, no. People want vision. People want, when they go to the waste a whole day that the president has now given them off of work, they waste a whole day standing in a line in the blazing sun. They want more than we get things done, or we're going to have service delivery. They want a new vision for a bright new future. That's what people want to vote for. That's why the ANC, I think, to a large extent, did so well. It was so clearly the antithesis of apartheid at some point, and that was the vision of the new South Africa that they sold. And the EFF really, since 2013, has been selling a very bright vision, a very clear vision of a socialist, we'll call it a hellhole. But for people who understand or who don't understand the finer points of economics, and who don't have an interest in the history of communism around the world, the EFF is really selling a vision. It's a brave new world of hope and money for everyone, houses for everyone. It's just promise after promise, and there's a lot of substance there. We don't agree with the substance, but there is substance there. And increasing, and the DA has now tried over the last 2 years, I think much to their credit, to also bring back some of their substance from their intellectual tradition. But just before the national elections, that's gone. Now it's just that we get things done. Well, congratulations. We don't want to hear about you getting things done. We want to hear about what is liberal democracy as a intellectual tradition. What is that going to give us here on the ground? Don't just say you're going to do what the law says you need to do. We need to know what else is there. And I think in the absence of that, there is no alternative for people who have been voting ANC every election for the last while. Of course, they're gonna look at the field and they're gonna be like, well, there's nothing here. I'm not a hardcore communist, so I'm not gonna vote EFF. So I might as well make the X for the ANC again. So yeah, we need some radicals in all of the opposition parties to really come to the forefront.
Hermann, before you answer or push back or agree with Martin, I mean, and you can work this into your next sort of response, but on the official opposition, the Democratic Alliance, and the sort of some of the analysis that with the posters, especially in Phoenix, how, and this was Tony Leon's point on a podcast with Peter Bruce, was that they were consistently pushing the service delivery message, and then the posters distracted from that. So I hear Martin's point about you actually need some sort of galvanizing message to get people out there. I disagree with him about a wasted day, because I don't think voting is ever wasteful, just by the way. But yeah, just work that into your response, and whether your thoughts on the DA's chances.
Yeah, so I am going to push back a bit, not too much, but just a bit. The thing is that you have to face the fact that municipal governance isn't terribly ideological. And in a country like South Africa, I almost want to say that it's I don't know if this is right. I'm going to say it and then listen with charity to what I'm trying to say. I almost think it's not the job of a political party to sell an ideology. I think it's the job of, it's upstream from politics, is ideological setting. It's up to Free Market Foundation, SARC-LIGA, IRR, the Freedom Advocacy Network. That's where the selling of a vision comes in. I think I might be wrong. It's not an absolutist statement, but it's a tough call when you're a political party and you've got a fixed budget. You need to get voters to vote for you. So you don't have, and this is going to sound terribly cynical, but you don't have time to educate your voters ideologically during an election campaign. You don't have the resources to do that. And that's why I think the three of us do what we do. because we do have time, because we're not election bound, we're not running for office. We do have the time and the will, and that's the efforts we are trying to put in to educate ideologically. And the real world constraints of a political party heading into an election is that you are publishing a manifesto and a poster, not a study guide or a syllabus. I think there's a fundamental educational deficit for classical liberals in South Africa. And I can understand that the expectation might be that during an election campaign, it's the time to address that deficit. But if I'm going to be charitable to my friends in party politics, especially in the DA, you have to spend your money there where you know it will deliver. And I know that the DA delivers. I know that tested well. And I know people like it. The polling shows that people like it, and that's what motivates them to vote. So while the IRR data shows that South Africans share priorities and positions of non-racialism and focus and how jobs are the root out of inequality, even racial inequality, we should be very careful not to read into that basket of positions an ideological identity with which South African voters are eager to associate during an election campaign. So when it comes to the DA gets things done, I do think that's the best angle they can take, because it is true, and you only have a certain number of posters, a certain number of money, a certain number of days and so on to get people to the polls. And then you can't start from, Mull taking it through to Hayek. That said, the posters, I think Tony Leon is absolutely right. And this is the weird thing, because I do love electoral politics. I've been fascinated by it since, before I was 3, #true story. And I always make the joke that I loved the first real election that I followed intensely was the 2010 UK election. And then in 2011, we had the municipal elections here. And then in 2012, we had Romney versus Obama. And in 2013, there wasn't supposed to be an election, and then the Pope resigned. So we had a papal election. So I always make the joke that for the last decade, there hasn't been a year where there wasn't an election campaign that I deeply invested myself into. And I'm not even a Catholic, but the papal conclave was an interesting thing to try and follow. But so I wear
just
two
riveting
hats.
television.
Yes, no, I must say, just looking at a chimney, going, is it privileged or previously disadvantaged smoke? It's privileged. Habemus papam. Anyhow, so I wear two hats when I look at elections. I am an advocate for classical liberalism, and I do wear the ideologue hat. But then, because I love politics and the electoral campaigning, I also wear the hat of what would I do were I in that position? Where would I spend my money? Where would I put my resources? How can I boost turnout? And in that regard, when it's an election campaign, it's the realpolitik election campaigning person in me that wins out, thinking that when it's an election campaign, it's about getting votes, not necessarily about, winning hearts and minds. That's a longer term project. And I think that the fundamental mistake with the posters, to address that point very, very briefly, and I spoke to people within the DA, and their greatest criticism of the posters, of don't see this right as an ideological right, of the right-minded people, not the far right-minded people, the right-minded people in the DA, their criticism of the posters are not that they were brusque or bold or robust. It was that they were off message. And as someone who's run campaigns and who has read up on every single campaign I can, message discipline during a campaign is the highest god of campaigning. So my criticism on the posters is, I think, exactly right, right alongside Tony Leon's criticism, was that they were really making progress with the DA gets things done, service delivery message. And then this came, and it was an unnecessary distraction. So I do think that's right, and I do think that's the thing. I'm often very envious of Martin, being one of the high priests of classical liberalism in South Africa, is people like me, we're out in the mission stations trying to figure out how many holy scriptures we need this month, and Martin is just there reading and meditating and praying. So his knowledge of the abstractions of the theory and even of the application is far superior to my own. But Martin, I do think that you are being a tad unkind with just the nuts and bolts of classical liberal politics. But I can't say you're completely wrong, though.
If I may respond, Chris.
Martin, just before you do, because
Yes.
you will get a chance. Don't worry. This isn't a debate with. Okay, never mind. This isn't a debate, so you will get a chance to respond. But okay, because Hermann dodged the question about how the DA will perform, so just work that into your sort of next diatribe, as it were.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, look. So I take the point entirely that municipal elections are more bread and butter and less theoretical. But when I look at and I must say I'm someone of a very distinct interest in South African politics and South African political history. So the rest of the world might be totally inconsistent with what I think I've seen, and that is that the National Party, when it really roared to success in a very in several elections in a very massive way, increasing its voter share and share of parliament in a very very big way. It was always backed up by, and I like Helen Zille's word for this. I saw it on Twitter a few years ago. An ecosystem of a and if you read South African history, you'll often read about the nationalist press, the nationalist civil society, completely identifying various things in South African society with a political party. Now, the National Party really did that brilliantly, and to what end? Was it doing it out of was it funding? Was it establishing these institutions, creating this what I referred to earlier as substance behind their electoral messages? Was it doing this really for the good of the Afrikaner people, or far more basically, was it doing it to win votes? And I think the latter answer, there's probably in its subjective estimation a bit of the former, but of the latter, I think that was what was usually in the forefront of their minds. They wanted to create an ecosystem, a movement, a groundswell for their ideas, and then create that substance behind them. Now, the African National Congress has done the same thing. And not necessarily the ANC, but in my reading, really the South African Communist Party over the years has provided that ecosystem. It has been in academic journals, and I'm not saying that we need people to write more academic articles, and that's going to lead to an explosion in votes, but there is a trickle down effect that's quite. I guess one way to think about it is in the 60s, articles were written about justice, and they were published in prestigious journals, and journalists read them, anti-apartheid journalists read them, and they wrote about that. And that might have led to Johnny Clegg singing his famous anti-apartheid songs, leading to international condemnation of this system. And that comes out of this ecosystem of what is effectively today the ANC/EFF press. I think we can broadly agree that that is unfortunately where we stand. Even though there is some moderate ANC press, they're not rabidly ANC. They are still ANC press at the end of the day. And the ANC Academy, the EFF Academy, there is the DA, the IFP, the Freedom Front Plus, Good, Ahang, whoever else, they have none of this. Absolutely zip. The Progressive Party did not have an ecosystem. It never strove towards an ecosystem since it was founded. It got the sympathy of various English language press in South Africa, but they were never the progressive press. They were not owned by where we had the Naspers, the nationalist press. We never had the pro press, the progressive press. There was never that effort. There was, since the Progressive Party was founded and it became the DP and then the DA, there has always been a focus on the election. There has never been a focus on creating the ecosystem to fill the gap between the elections and building up that groundswell, creating, communicating that substance of what our vision for South Africa is to academics, to journalists, and at the end of the day, to ordinary people. That effort has really never been made in the DA and various other parties. That effort has never been made. The EFF, I think, is achieving that to an extent, even though I'm not sure I can say they're making that effort. I think they want to eat at the trough more than they want to create this ecosystem. But you've seen it happen. You've seen various blogs with not insubstantial readership being pro EFF, saying that this is simply the only way to go. They understand the plight of the black man in South Africa. You have seen rabidly communist academics in South Africa's universities. An unthinkable thing, really, just a few short years ago. People being brazenly in the ideological camp of specific political parties. There's none of that for the DA. Literally nothing. It doesn't exist. Now, the point that Hermann makes, and I think he's totally right, is that you don't have, in the space of an election campaign, you simply don't have the money or the resources to educate people about Mill. But please don't educate people about Mill. There are better liberals.
Yeah, I was going to say, please just hand out copies of Anthem and Atlas Shrugged. Rather do that.
That's even better than Mill, yes. But I would start with some simpler liberals, though. So I understand that. I understand the DA can't put up posters quoting Locke or whatever, and then expecting South Africans to understand self-ownership and the finer details of the free market system or whatever like that. So in that context, the "we get things done" message makes sense. But my criticism of the DA is that behind that message, all they have is their actual experience. They are getting things done. I'm not taking that away from the DA. As a government, they are quite effective, even though as a liberal, I don't want them to always be that effective. But it's true. What they say is true. And I have no reason to doubt that's polling well with people. But I think there is that voter who he hears his clock ring on election day, and he thinks that I will never vote for the ANC. They have destroyed the country. I will never vote for the EFF. They want a communist dictatorship of the proletariat or whatever. But am I going to get out of bed to vote for the DA when I don't really see any substance behind them? I think there is that voter that's going to decide to turn around in his bed and keep sleeping. And I think I mean this is a long story, and it gets quite abstract the further back you go. But I think there is something to be said for the DA it's had many opportunities to create this ecosystem, to get to this point where it could have more ideological messaging. And then with that, I don't mean a thesis like I would ideologically message. There are practical ways to do that. But where it could get to a point where it can do that and really can present its vision for South Africa, a real alternative vision, and then have South Africans understanding that. I think that could have happened, and it could still happen in the future if the DA and other parties, Freedom Front, whoever else, takes the conscious decision to create that ecosystem, the liberal ecosystem, to not just stand aloof from these think tanks, but to have its own think tank, to have its yes, with the director being Hermann Pretorius, but. Don't shy away from creating its own newspapers. To my knowledge, that's not yet illegal, but do it. Just do it. Have the Liberal Daily or whatever. Just Just do something. Look at what the National Party did. Look at what the ANC did in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and do it. Do not have a tunnel vision focus on every election and then a tunnel vision focus on governing. There is something extra that you need, and that is the vision for the future, the ideology, the ecosystem. So that's a long way of me. I agree with everything you said, Herman, but that's just a long way of qualifying what I said earlier. And then just quickly on Chris's point, how the DA will fare. I don't think it's gonna. I don't. I'm not optimistic. I'm not optimistic. I think if I'm going to bring it back to the posters because the DA has been losing votes, and I think there's been a few blunders now. But I think that when they decided to put up the posters, or whoever decided to put up the posters, the party should have just committed. The fact that they took them down means that there is a situation where they are now again trying to please people who would never vote DA, and the chances of it finding forgiveness amongst the people who would vote DA and who were DA voters and who complained about the posters will now forgive it. I don't think that's going to happen. So the removal of the posters, I think, was a bad idea, even though putting up the posters in the first place might have also been a bad idea. So if that could be a small microcosm of the DA's I guess their chances this election. I'm not optimistic. I'm really not optimistic about their chances. But at least the IRR research that I think one of you referred to earlier says that there's going to be a nice healthy chunk of the vote that's going to be split between smaller parties. So it's not necessarily that the DA doing worse is necessarily going to benefit the ANC. So there is that at least.
Chris, can I jump in here? I mean, I can't agree more with anything that Martin has said. I think he's absolutely right. The concern we sort of face is a race against time in a very weird way, because if one has to be historically honest, you can draw a line from the abolitionist movement in the UK to the politification or the party politification of it in the Republican Party. And it took a matter of decades to go from Wilberforce to Lincoln, where you have, and that's why I mentioned earlier, this upstream element. You need to be upstream. The question is just, how we've also, it's almost as if three races are being run in South Africa now. How quickly can the socialists screw up the country to a point of no return? How quickly can an electable alternative capitalize on the failures of the ANC? And how quickly can the upstream ideological education, or activation is perhaps a better word than education, because these people don't need to be educated about classical liberals. They are already, in the broader sense, pro-freedom. So how can they be activated to feed into a stronger body politic? And it's hindsight is 2020, but the DP did quite spectacularly, going from 1994 to 1999, going I think from 2.4% to 9 point something. And the DP posters from those election campaigns from the 90s were things like, free markets, freedom, freedom, federalism, and free markets, or something like that. And I mean, just I wouldn't make the language too graphic, but it does something to me when I see those posters. It's just beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. But then the historical anomaly of the chasing of growth, and this is going to be weird. I think the DA became too eager to grow.
Absolutely.
But the problem was, then you do have the National Democratic Revolution charging forward, and there is something to be said for let's overtake that train so that we can get it off the tracks. In an ideal world, the DA would go from a 9% party to an 11% party to a 13% party, all the way up to what I think is probably a realistic ceiling of 28-30%. And then, had they chosen to take that route of free markets, freedom, federalism as their mythos to go into the ideological battle of ideas in South Africa, I think that would have been it would have rippled out into the ecosystem that I think you and I both desire. But then there was something to be said for, there is a national democratic revolution that we have to overtake and then get rid of. So I'm not excusing the DA's loss of, let's be honest, loss of identity, of ideological identity. But I do think that hindsight is 2020. And if we want to be completely honest now, I would almost want the party to focus on getting votes so that the rest of us can focus on that ideological activation. And then to have the party, as you say, be open to that sort of interaction and that sort of, symbiotic relationship. But it's these three things. It's these matters of time, these three time-sensitive issues that really push the DA into, and all South African classical liberals in a way, into an impossible position where there's nothing right to win. If they were to launch this liberal activation angle, that would detract from their resources just to manage as a political party and ensure that they keep on giving those baby steps that is necessary for the momentum and the perception of growth and therefore credibility from your ordinary electorate. So at the end of the day, when I think about where the alternative should come from, I think there's a far greater responsibility on NGOs like the Free Market Foundation, like the IRR, like the Freedom Advocacy Network, like Sakeliga, to promote liberalism, to go upstream of the DA so that the DA or whomever, whatever liberal party or party that manifests in some liberal way, being the recipient thereof. I've explained it to people, and I don't know if it's a good explanation, but it makes sense to me that the concept of education, of formal education, is a given. People just accept it's a good thing. No one asks which high school, are you going to high school or whatever. It's always which high school are you going to? And that sort of acceptance, that baseline of commonality has not yet been established for liberalism in South Africa. We should no longer be in a position where we are trying to promote schools. That's the job of the schools. That's the job of, the political parties. We should just be fighting to get to that point where it is, of course, you believe in a free market. It's just which free market party are you going to support? The same way as we say, of course, you should get an education. It's just a matter of which education you're going to get. So to my mind, that is not the job of a political party, because it would be like asking a school to, at the same time, promote itself as a destination for schooling while trying to convince a skeptic audience that schooling is worth it in the first place. So it's an impossible ask for a political party. And it's sad that this political party has been shoved into this corner. But the best way out of it is the activation of ordinary South Africans who believe in the broad swathe of freedom and liberalism, what we call the moderate middle. And I don't think that can come from the DA, and I have some sympathy for them. It's a terrifying business. I've been in party political campaigning. It's a terrifying business. It's not the battle of ideas. It's really just a battle of budgets and the scramble for votes. So it's in a weird way. I'm a harsh critic of the DA regularly, but sometimes I do feel that us liberals can cut them some slack, knowing that if we did our job better, we would see them enjoying the results. So not to excuse them, but I do think that this ecosystem needs to be created at top speed, but we can't expect it of the DA to do. They just need to, keep up with the NDR as good as they can. It really is up to outside actors to activate this latent liberalism in South Africa. Oh, and on the point of how will the DA do, let me put a number on it. I probably expect them to get about 23% of the vote, which would be down 3.9% on the 2016 results, but up 2.1%, yes, on the 2019 results. And I think that would be fine. It won't be spectacular. But in the last 2 years, the DA has decidedly taken a more liberal angle on especially
Absolutely.
things like race-based policy and the free market. And that's to be welcomed. So if they can just consolidate and stop hemorrhaging votes, I think that would be good. In the broader scheme of things, I don't think the posters will cost them too much. I think it stunted their growth. I don't think it knocked it back. So I think were it for the posters, they might have followed a trajectory into 25% or so. I just think the poster debacle stunted that growth. I don't think that it actively cost them support. I think it cost them potential support. So I think we're going to see a DA around 23% and ANC around 52%, and an EFF probably between 12 and 14%.
Before I give Martin a chance to disagree with you, because he was shaking his head now. I don't know
No.
what
I was
specific
shaking
point.
my head in agreement. I was shaking my head in agreement about
I
the
don't know
EFF's
if
growth.
that's how that works, but okay.
Yeah, I don't want to be like, oh yes, the EFF is growing. That's great. No, it's terrible. It's terrible.
Well, I mean, to play the objective, quote unquote, holistic point of view, they haven't won a mandate anywhere. So, do we actually know whether they can govern effectively or not,
or whether they want to? I have the suspicion that they are enjoying their perpetual, petulant party political pandering. Yeah, thank you for those P words. But I think they enjoy not being in power. It serves their purpose. It serves their purpose not to have the responsibility of governance. And you saw them outsmart the DA in the 2016 negotiations, where they gave the DA what the DA thought they wanted. But actually, the EFF got from it a win, several bites at the apple. They got the idea of, we got the ANC out of power. We put the DA in power. We are the real kingmakers. But they had no responsibilities. And I've got a very strong sneaking suspicion that the EFF want no government responsibilities. They are enjoying the cheap seats.
Okay, before we unpack the EFF and Freedom Front Plus, just a bit more specifically, and all due respect to the quote-unquote smaller parties, I just wanted to get both your thoughts on this quote-unquote phenomenon of the possibility of more coalition government, which seems to be not sweeping the world, I don't want to say, but I mean, in the latest German elections, it seems to be now the way forward, at least according to The Economist. That's the sort of now path going with coalitions. Do you foresee that being a bigger trend in South Africa specifically? And I don't know if this is the right way to phrase the sort of B part of the question, but where do you see the biggest sort of, or the tightest battlegrounds, as it were? Maybe Martin, if you want to go first.
Yeah, no, sure. I really don't know, but I hope so. I'm a big fan of the idea of coalition governments, and I'm glad that when Hermann was talking now, he said that the DA will reach a ceiling of something like 28%, and I mean that's excellent to me. The idea of a party that has the type of dominance that the ANC has had in South Africa really frightens me. It's very dangerous in a constitutional system, in a system that hopes to control power, for that to come about. And I mean, I don't want the DA to be a dominant force, because I know how precarious liberalism in a political party is. The moment the DA tastes real power, you might just see any vestiges of liberalism just evaporate, and then it's
Boris Johnson.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's the COVID, the responses to COVID as well. I mean, show exactly that. It doesn't matter who's been in power in any country, like all across the world, with one or two exceptions. It doesn't matter who was in power. There was a uniform response to this thing, and it was to greater and smaller extents equally authoritarian. So yeah, I think you want coalition governments. You want there to be that fragmentation. Now, what bothers me in South Africa is, and it's always going to be this with me, is the EFF, and that is to say that it doesn't. To my mind, it really doesn't matter whether the ANC goes below 50 because the EFF is growing, and that in my mind just means a ANC plus. So the ANC proper losing votes to the EFF is taking money out of your one left pocket and putting it in your far left pocket. It's still your pockets. And that's a big problem. I think that that South Africa is going to have to come to terms with the EFF being a very destructive force in our politics. It's not just going to be unstable coalitions, but it's going to be coalitions that really race to the bottom to please the EFF's ideological preconceptions, and that includes all the worst things you can think of. What's their promise during the municipal elections? Now they're gonna have some kind of wealth tax or a property tax or something that municipal governments are apparently gonna levy. I'm sure that if they in certain municipalities, if they have a kingmaker role, that's what they're going to say. They're going to say, give us this policy so we can sell that to our voters, and say that we've now given our biggest promise in this coalition. Now, that to me that represents an absolute race to the bottom, and yeah, that's going to undermine the idea of coalitions a little bit for me. It's not like in Germany where you really do have a nice spread of worldviews, I guess, within the paradigm of European politics, where conservatives and liberals and everyone believes in the welfare state. So within that paradigm, you do have, at least from my reading, quite a nice spread. In South Africa, we don't yet have that spread. We have this moderate middle, but they're outside of the political system to a very large extent. Those of us who are in the political spectrum, there's a very large proportion of people with extremely bad ideas, and it's a dominant part of our political discourse and our political paradigm. So yeah, we need to activate the moderate middle to come back in and really even out this spread, I guess. And that's really what that must stabilize on coalitions, I would say. And I mean, the Zambian thing that Hermann referred to earlier is also a good example. I mean, there's I think that the dominance of the Patriotic Front has now been kind of broken, and the chances of that stabilizing into an almost a Nigerian situation where you have the a relative, almost an American situation where the major parties are relatively stable in their support base. That would be good if there's that stabilization. But in South Africa, I mean, that would be excellent if we can get everyone down to about 30% or so. That would be good. But then, of course, I really take Armand's point about there's a clock that's ticking by, and that is to a large extent why I guess I've become cynical about the more cynical about the prospects of the formal electoral system being the ticket to freedom in South Africa. I've been hugely I guess positive about the phenomenon of communities really just saying, well, screw it, we're gonna carry on, do your voting, whatever. We're now going to really protect ourselves, state-proof ourselves, chaos-proof ourselves against this nonsense. And some of the benefits of having a collapsing state, and I'm not saying it's overall a good thing, but one of the benefits of that is that government really loses the capability to stop communities from helping themselves, and that's really where South Africa is right now as we speak. When the ANC took power in the 1990s, when it was biding its time in the negotiations, it knew that it was going to inherit this massive police force and military that stood unrivaled in Africa. But that's now certainly not the case anymore. The military and the security apparatus is more a symbol of power than really power itself. And I think we're at the beginning of a moment of intense constitutional creativity. I'm writing a series of articles for the Daily Friend now. The first one was published Saturday the 17th, and in it, essentially, I think I hypothesize that we are moving towards a point where the collapsing political situation is going to lead to, I guess, one of four things. The first thing, which I'm hoping it will, and I think there are some indications that it will, is that South Africa will at some point have to federalize, formally federalize, constitutionally federalize, because that's really the only good option that the ANC will have. The other option will be South Africa is going to break apart. I think that's something the ANC does not want. And I think that's something that most South Africans fundamentally do not want. The entire thing is going to collapse and it's going to be chaos and anarchy, or we're going to continue to hemorrhage and just go on the path of no growth that we are now, which I think is unlikely. I think most people reach a point where they're like, no, we can't take it anymore. Something needs to give. So I'm quite optimistic in that respect. I don't think it's going to come from the electoral process. I think that circumstances, a collapsing economy being the number one factor, and the increasing provincialism, I guess, that we're seeing in the Western Cape. I think the Western Cape will be a catalyst for this. Is going to lead to a situation where the ANC won't have a choice but to make some radical constitutional changes, positive constitutional changes for us liberals. It simply will not have a choice. I think that is we're at the beginning really of that eventuality, and I don't think the ballot box is going to take us there. So I'm cynical about the use of the ballot box now. I'm getting increasingly cynical, but I'm quite positive about really where South Africa is going in a constitutional sense.
Hermann, just your thoughts on the coalition possibility?
Yeah, I mean, proportional representation or systems with elements of proportional representation are designed for coalition. We don't have a constituency-based or a purely constituency-based system like the UK, where you need to win a majority of seats. You don't need to win a majority of votes or whatever, where there isn't a direct correlation between the percentage of your support and the percentage of legislative seats you occupy. So in a proportional system, it implies heavily that coalitions will be the way forward. And I don't think I'm as down on the ballot box as Martin is. I might just be more naive. I mean, that's a very real possibility. It's always dangerous to disagree with Martin. But the thing is, we're getting into some really almost psychological stuff when we look at things like the nation state, democracy within the nation state. It almost becomes an issue or a question of subjective, emotive, symbolic relevance. And I think that's where the ballot box primarily gets its power from. I don't think the ballot box demands the loyalty or the fealty. It has, for the last 200 years across the world, in democracies, because it is a great functional mechanism. I think it has survived and will probably continue to survive because it is a symbolic mechanism with some practical implications. So the question then ultimately, almost in a behavioral psychology kind of way, becomes, how can political parties harness the behavioral psychological potency of the ballot box to empower a certain set of ideas? So when we look at the way forward for South Africa's democracy, I think people will harbor a nostalgic, perhaps even melancholic desire for the ballot box to be what it is. It's a bit like Cicero or Cicero preaching in the Senate about a republic that only existed in his mind and in his heart. The love for democracy will probably go a similar route. It is not a great system, but it is such a beautiful system in a way that we want it to be a good system. And I think humanity in the modern sense of the word, from the 18th century onwards, wants democracy to be a beautiful system. So I think that's what will keep it alive. Now, the question is that symbolism, will it be politically potent? That I don't know. I think the ballot box will continue to exist with varying, degrees of influence, but will it actually become the touch point of constitutional mechanism or functioning for a set of decisions to be made in a specific way with a specific underlying philosophy? I don't know, but I think it can, and I hope it can, because the moderate middle, the data shows, does exist. But again, the caveat of saying that we should not read into a basket of priorities and interests an ideological identity. However, if political parties can, from this basket of priorities and issues, at least manufacture something more than a potent symbol out of the ballot box's existence, I think we're really off to the races. And in this regard, let me go off on a little tangent. One of my most fundamental frustrations, the buggest of bugbears that I have in South African politics, is the ACDP. In a country that is 86% Christian, with a moderate middle, small c conservative, free market, traditional, religious, cisgendered society, that the ACDP is a political non-entity is, to me, just the greatest political shame this country can encounter. The ACDP has the potential to be one of the 3 or at least 2 most relevant parties in this country, and it is as irrelevant as mosquito farts. It really is a tragedy of epic proportions, and that is what places a lot of strain on a party like the DA. Because the DA must then become the be-all and end-all for everyone who forms loosely part of a centrist centre-right coalition. But if the bloody parties like the ACDP can start acting like a political party, can discover some gumption, can get something representing an ecosystem or political purpose, then you can actually start harnessing the ballot box to build strong coalitions, not tangential symbolic coalitions that just give the perception of or give the emotional security of at least someone's in charge somewhere. But if you can have an ACDP performing as it should in the 10%, between 10 and 15%, you've got the DA stabilizing around 28%. You've got an IFP that discovers some of its, traditionalist Zulu nationalism with its pride in self-doing. A pride, I might add, is a psychological non-negotiable part of the free market. If you can get the IFP back to something like a 10% party, you can get the Freedom Front Plus to stabilize around 4%. COPE can be, something like a multiracial Freedom Front Plus, I don't know, around 3%. If you start getting these political parties to actually behave like political parties, then you actually can have the potency of the ballot box's symbolism transform loose streams of center-right thought that constructs the moderate middle into a coherent political alternative to the ANC-EFF hegemonic madness. My frustration with South African politics is not that it is too toxic or that it is just subpar. It is just bad. The politicians we have in there often are just useless, where they've bought into this idea that, just I don't know, stop the delay the decline, or let the patient not suffer too much on their way to the morgue or state hospital. But I repeat myself. The thing here is that we've got such non-entity, amateur hour political parties, and we, the South African voter, we let them get away with it. We let them get away with it time and time again, because somewhere the Calvinist idea kicked in that politics is not something to be discussed. Politics is something that happens elsewhere, once a few years, in a school hall or in a parkie somewhere near a seesaw. For the rest of the time, politics is a no-go. It is, moet nou net nie met oom Fransie praat of oom Piet praat of oom Tannie Sanna praat nie. Don't go near Uncle Ntando's opinions of this and that. Just leave it. And that is a fundamental upstream abdication of any responsibility, any civic responsibility. So if we can actually not just activate the moderate middle, but take the dirty wordness away from politics and just go, let's not call it politics. Let's not call it ideology. Let's just call it, what will the government do with my taxes? Can we just have that as a stable conversation starter? Can we have that on bloody fortune cookies, or printed on the insides of McDonald's boxes, or just spell it out in Steers sauce on every counter you encounter? The moment we can get that taboo bullshit out of South African political discussion in the smallest of private spheres, that's the moment when we actually make a breakthrough. We can try to have the ballot box mean A, B, and C. The political parties can promise A, B, and C. But until politics becomes a responsibility of the citizen, a civic engagement, until that happens, we're dead. And that's what we should do. That is what the moderate middle should be activated for. To say that, believing that the market should be free is a good thing that goes well with eggs, bacon, fried tomatoes, a piece of toast, and baked beans. That have a breakfast and a bit of a political conversation. Until we get to that point, it's dead on arrival. It is absolutely dead on arrival. And it's because of that, tabooness, that the standard and the quality of South African politics is so embarrassing. It's so embarrassing, because there are good people in the parties, really, genuinely. In every single party, I think they are, not every single party, in most of the parties, they are genuinely good public servants, but they are let down by this curse of low expectations, partnered with a tabooism, partnered with a cynical irrelevance and a naivety that surely the worst can't happen in South Africa. But yeah, so long and short of it is, if you ask me about coalitions, I will go into a 45-minute rant about how the ACDP is disappointing me and God. But I do think that if we want to get to a point where we can actually save South Africa in a federal way, because I think people want that, then we need to get upstream and get people not just to care about politics, but get them to care enough about politics so that it becomes, part of the water cooler conversation in a way. And don't call it politics. Don't call it capitalism. Screw the isms. Just call it, have you seen what Gwede Mantashe has done with our taxes lately? Just that. And I think that will give rise to the stable sort of coalition, the platonic coalition that we aspire to, where you've got a healthy classical liberal section, you've got a healthy conservative section, you've got a healthy, center-right coalition that managed to govern Cape Town in a 7-party coalition for 5 years, a full municipal term. But anyhow, before I, ramble into further incoherence, let me stop there.
Yeah, now that Hermann has psychoanalyzed and emasculated the South African nationhood, and he failed to mention hash browns or ciabatta in terms of breakfast, and he mentioned Plato, so he's never going to talk on this podcast ever again. Martin, we have to give the Freedom Front Plus some airtime. So your thoughts on how they might do? I mean, they've got their sort of strongholds, as it were, but do you think they'll, like they did in previous elections, take some votes from the DA, continue to do that? Do you see some bigger growth for them? I don't know how closely you've been following their messaging.
Yeah, no, look, I'm definitely no political analyst like Herman. So my predictions about party growth and so on usually would probably be wrong. But I can only talk about what my feeling and gut says about it. Um, I'm unimpressed. I'm very unimpressed by the Freedom Front. I've been reading a lot about their history recently, and that's unfortunately made me a lot more unimpressed. It's not an entity that really came about as a principled defense of their values, and I think probably most of their values I completely agree with. Um, that didn't happen. They really just came out of the old Conservative Party and some other organizations in a very haphazard way, and they've when they grew in the last national and in the last general election, I was quite excited. I thought that this meant that the center right suburb conservatism, let's call it, was taking on a more muscular type of character, and that just petered away. The last you heard about fighting back was in the 2019 election. I don't know where the Freedom Front has really fought back. The Democratic Party, when it was a small party in the 1990s, it really did fight back. You continuously heard about what the Democratic Party was doing, even though it had a negligible share of the vote and a negligible amount of seats in parliament. Now the same is not true of the Freedom Front. They and I think Arman will probably disagree with me on this, but it's a point I've made before. Is I really think that the Freedom Front and also the DA to an extent needs to occupy a space where they really roll up their sleeves and drop the parliamentary attitude, the pretense of British and European parliamentarism. The EFF has done this, and I am a big believer in the school of learning from your enemies, and that has not harmed them. Now we can talk about the implications of this for society. Surely, of course, I want a stable political culture. That's absolutely what I, as a rule of law loving liberal, want. But given this reality that the national democratic revolution is here and it's steaming ahead with very little resistance, the ANC's internal party battle is really that's the only resistance to the national democratic revolution, and that's not a good thing. I want the Freedom Front, the ACDP, sure, definitely, given the very anti-Christian nature of communism and socialism. I want these parties to get up and stand in front of Parliament and say, "Fuck y'all." Seriously, I want more of that.
Reverend Meshwe, I hope you're listening.
Yes, no, I mean, literally that. And the Freedom Front, in my mind at least, kind of represented something in that, moving in that direction with this idea of, fight back. We've now reached a point. We're gonna take the fight to them. And no, that just didn't happen. They are the most parliamentary party in parliament, and that's not what we need from the Freedom Front at this point in time. I think South Africa is in that period where we need to suspend that for a while. We need people to speak truth to power and then really say, listen, I'm not going to engage with the ANC and the EFF as if expropriation without compensation is just another day in parliament. We're getting together in a committee and we're discussing expropriation without compensation. No, the answer is no. ANC, EFF, this is unacceptable. You were not going to do this. You're proposing the end of our constitutional order. You're proposing the beginning of the end of our democracy, of a state of a prosperous. You're taking the only seed of prosperity that could still grow and you're throwing it away. We're not going to discuss that with you as if it's just another day. we are going to draw a line in the sand and say, no, screw you. And yes, chair, I'm not going to take it back. Kick me out of the room. Do what the Irish do, the Northern Irish. They get elected and they don't pitch. They don't go into parliament. So yes, that holds its own that certainly holds its own risks. But we are, I think, at that stage where we need street fighters in parliament. And I'm not saying that as a good in itself. I'm being very pragmatic here, as someone who very much rallies against the idea of pragmatism. I am being very pragmatic here because I can smell the burning country around me. The EFF essentially was the catalyst for this starting. They are a hardcore Marxist-Leninist party by their own admission. They went into parliament and they said, we're not going to play this game. We have a vision of death and destruction that we want for South Africa, and we are going to pursue that. There's certainly a lot of what Hermann says, and that they don't want to govern, and they definitely won't govern if they get power. They will destroy every institution of governance. They will take whatever the ANC hasn't stolen, and then they will destroy whatever skeleton of an institution remains. And they're quite open about that. They don't have pretenses of constitutionality about their ideas. In one election, they had posters talking about what was it? They were incentivizing poverty at some level, really saying that if you're poor, you can get all these things that people who aren't absolutely poor can't get. There is simply so much that we need to learn from the EFF if we want to counter that groundswell that's appearing there, and they are going to grow again in this election in a very concerning way. And unless we really take the Freedom Front's apparent slogan, "Fight back," there's no way that that tide will be stopped. You need to give the bully a bloody nose, and that to me was the kind of the role that I thought the Freedom Front would play. They would be the antithesis, to an extent, of the EFF in Parliament. Not the ideological antithesis, but the okay, well, not antithesis. So that I want them to be as radical. Yeah, they need to be the people who do exactly what the EFF do, but for a different vision, to bring about that balance. Shout back, at least. Shout back at the EFF when they shout at you. That's what I had hoped for the Freedom Front. They did not deliver, and I guess with hindsight, it makes sense that they did not deliver. They sell stability as a message. They sell a return to a type of iconic 90s 50 American type of middle class stability that you won't get that from you won't get what I'm saying I wanted the Freedom Front to be from the Freedom Front. So I guess I was always wrong expecting that to happen. So I've been disappointed by the Freedom Front. But again, my gut tells me that I think they're probably going to take a few extra votes from the DA as a part of the same process, probably that started with the 2019 election, when the Freedom Front took several tens of thousands of votes from the DA. I think that's probably still going to happen. I have no evidence to justify that, but I'm not sure the DA has done enough to address the questions that the voters who abandoned it for the Freedom Front, the concerns they specifically had. They haven't, for instance, fired that youth leader, Luyulu Mpiti, I think, who is a race hustler. I mean, he now that the party is no longer race hustling, he's no longer race hustling, but he's a race hustler. So they haven't taken enough action against the race hustlers in the DA yet. In my mind, that would indicate to the new Freedom Front voters that they would need to vote DA this time. So I think the Freedom Front is going to pick up quite a few votes from the DA in this municipal election. Maybe not enough to change the percentages that much, but I think we're probably still going to see that. So yeah, that's what my gut tells me. I don't follow the polls and the surveys quite as closely as I probably should, But that really is the feeling that I'm getting. But I would definitely be interested to know if Herman disagrees radically with me or just a bit.
Yeah, Herman, please, your thoughts on the Vryheidsfront, but also whether any quote unquote smaller parties jump out to you. From my point of view, one that I don't know if they'll necessarily do well or not, but one that jumps into my head is Action SA. So, any others that you want to sort of bring up?
Yeah. So on the Freedom Front Plus, I don't think Martin is right. With that that the damage from the DEA benefiting the Freedom Front Plus in 2019 will continue. I don't think so. I think an interesting thing has happened in the DA in the last 2 years that might not be terribly visible is, for all the DA's flaws, their local councillors, ward councillors especially, are top quality. Of course, you've got your exceptions, and of course, you will hear stories about people having DA ward councillors that are not good at all, that are useless. But I mean, on the whole, I've spoken to some people who should be natural Freedom Front Plus voters, but who still have a DA ward councillor from the 2016 successful, success of the DA with their 26.9% of the vote. Natural Freedom Front Plus voters who said they will vote DA, not because they like the party, but because they like and respect the local councillor. So for all the mistakes of traditional politics, there is this element of a traditional party with some respectability. And I'll come on to Martin's point now, because he makes a very good point. A point I'm not sure I disagree or agree with, but that where there is a party of some standing, of acknowledgement of process and structure, they attract people of competence rather than hotheads and opportunists. And the DA is really known for, I think, in the whole country, for if you've got a good ward councillor, the chances are very good that it's a DA ward councillor. I think that will stem the tide that might have started flowing in 2019, alongside the sidelining of the BEE but nice angle that Musi Maimane took the DA, and Lindiwe Mazibuko also took the DA on during their catastrophic leadership of the party. So I do think the Freedom Front Plus won't be boosted significantly. And this is where the polling becomes quite difficult to follow, because they are a very small party. I mean, they're a 2 to 4% party. And the best polling I could see and I could find from whatever source shows that they're a 2 to 4% party, and they're going to get 2 to 4% of the votes, depending on where you are in the country. So I think nationally, the Freedom Front Plus will probably get like 2.6% of the vote or something. I don't think it'll be a spectacular election for them. And I think part of that is the advantage of incumbency isn't massive in South Africa, but where it is applicable, the ANC or the DA has it. The Freedom Front Plus really doesn't. With regards to the Queensberry rules or the civility question, it's a tough one, because I really have a lot of sympathy for Martin's point. However, I'll get back to that point. Let me make a slightly different point first. I don't see an EFF apocalypse coming. I don't. I think the EFF is massively underperforming in a country that has 75% youth unemployment, the majority of them being male, the majority of them being black, the majority of them being in townships and rural areas. There where the EFF should be able to stoke the fires of Marxist anger, and they're not. The EFF should be a massive deal in South Africa, like the ACDP, perhaps to a smaller degree. But in a country where 3 out of every 4 young people are unemployed, and you've got a party that blatantly positions itself to appeal to those voters, and they barely scratch double figures, I think that's quite embarrassing. I think that's political underperformance. I think the EFF has a very, if the DA has a ceiling at 28% of the national vote, I think the EFF has a ceiling of 14% of the national vote. Because if you actually go look at where their votes come from, it's the black middle class, the intelligentsia, where the left has always gotten its support, where socialism has always gotten its support. And your ordinary South African is far too intelligent to be part of the intelligentsia. They are far too smart to be well educated, and to make the mistakes of well educated idiots. Because, I mean, if you're a Marxist, you might have certain preconceptions, but if you're in a rural township or in a township somewhere, you still look both ways before you cross the street. You don't just look left and to the far left. So I don't see the EFF being this massive threat that they are, or that Martin thinks them to be, for the simple reason that I think in a country in these circumstances, they should be running away with the youth vote, running away with it, and they're hardly scratching it. They're doing better than the DA, but far below what they should actually be doing if they were a true radical revolutionary party. Where the EFF is strong is in the optics of politics, and I think Julius Malema is a genius, a political genius, to come from his not just cognitive but careerist deficits, to be fired from the ANC Youth League. I mean, let's not even talk about his lacking skill in carpentry, but to take the failures, personal and professional, that he has to endure, and still be one of the most relevant politicians in this country in a party that is, vocal, is quite spectacular. But that is because I think their antics play to their base, and they've got a narrow base. If you want Freedom Front Plus or DA or ACDP or COPE to do the antic politics thing, it's going to alienate their bases. Because whether you like it or not, there is in the middle class, black and white, Afrikaans, English, and all other languages, there is an aspiration of civility. And if you are going to try and target the middle class vote and the aspirant middle class vote, you can't throw out that idealistic value of civility. So I do hear the anger and the frustration, and I share it. I wish that the system can be shaken up. But I don't think that the way to do it is to take the EFF's tactics and swing it for the right argument. I think that's very much, that will become a values-based disconnect that people won't appeal to. Some people might appeal to. I might be fundamentally wrong, but from the internal polling I could have seen that had been done over the past few weeks, the group that shifted the strongest in terms of the DA's posters and the perceived incivility of it was your middle class white English voter, the base of the DA for as long as it has existed. So you do run into some profound difficulties where the brand and the product need to be in tune, and that's a difficult thing. That's a tough thing to do. However, that said, I think I always say to people that if you want to understand electoral strategy, in my opinion, you only need to understand a few things: Brexit, the abolitionist movement, the Napoleonic Wars, and Donald Trump's victory. Because each of those manage to fundamentally convince public opinion through strategic exerts. If you want to have a political insurrection, you go the way of the Brexiteers. You build that ecosystem. They had an ecosystem, they had time of 40, 50 years. And they played by the Queensberry rules. The Brexiteers in the British Parliament were the best parliamentarians in the House. They were the ones who knew the procedures beautifully. They weren't the ones who like, the Scottish nationalists or the Green Party made the most noise, but they played the game better than anyone else. It's a bit like Mitch McConnell in getting the Supreme Court that the Republicans have been desirous of for a century. He didn't do it through grandstanding. He did it through plainly, mind-numbingly boring procedural brilliance. So I do think there is something to be said for playing the game. And I think this is where Frederik van Zyl did fall short. He thought that he cannot bring down the political system from the inside. And I think Brexit shows the lie that is. Brexit was, I think, such a great example of an extra parliamentary movement led probably by Nigel Farage, and an internal movement led by your Bernard Jenkins, your Bill Cashes of the world, your Owen Pattersons, your Kate Hoey's. So I think it's not an either or. If we want to establish the ecosystem, Martin, that you speak of, and I think you're right in doing that, we do it by a both-hand approach, where we are outside developing liberal street fighting, but you are also in Parliament, outmaneuvering, outvoting, outproceduring your opponents. Because I can promise you that if you had a dedicated coterie of 10 MPs who made it their business to study the procedures of the House, you would club every ANC member of Parliament and every EFF member of Parliament for a plain procedural 6. So I do think that there is something to be said. I don't think it's as spectacular and as flashy as the guerrilla tactics of the EFF are. But I think there's a place for that, but outside of Parliament, because for whatever liberalism wants to achieve, it has to acknowledge the symbolic or the inherent love of symbols and establishments like the nation state, the flag, the national anthem, and parliamentary civility is part of that value-based aspiration to that world. So to conclude the rambling that I so often get paid for, not tonight, obviously. The EFF, I'm worried about, but not too worried about, because I think they're going to ceiling pretty soon. The Freedom Front Plus, I am going to share your sentiment, but for a different reason. And that is purely, I know for a fact that the Freedom Front Plus were caught on the hop by surprise by the number of votes and seats they got in Parliament. And I'm afraid to say it. But I don't think the Freedom Front Plus is a serious party. For one simple reason. John Steenhuisen has a higher approval rating amongst Freedom Front Plus members than Pieter Groenewald has.
Sure. Okay. I don't really know how to segue that into the next question. Martin, I have to
there is
give
the question of
Hermann-
Action SA.
Okay, you can get onto Action SA,
yes.
but I was going to ask. Okay, so you can get onto Action SA, but so I have to give Hermann the final word on the podcast. Otherwise, I get angry messages from him afterwards. So, give us your thoughts on some of the smaller parties, but also just your sort of final, I don't know, pearls of knowledge, anything like that you want to leave us with.
Yeah, so I mean, again, the disclaimer that I'm certainly no political analyst applies here as well. But Action SA is an interesting one. I think their whole game is in Johannesburg. I think they were pretty clear about that from the very get go, and that's where Herman Mashaba plans to be mayor. So the fact that he chose that means that's where their game is going to be at its best. Now they have produced a few polls. I'm not sure if it's their own polls or independent ones, but which show them taking a hell of a lot of votes in Johannesburg. Now I mean that I find that very interesting. That would be. I guess if they succeed in that, if they become a major force in Johannesburg, that could be the thing that has been talked about in, I guess, in our circles for many years now, and that is that there should be a so-called black uh, center-right political party that finally appears, where the IFP has failed, where COPE, I guess, has failed, because that is a huge electorate that really doesn't function as a bloc, which is I think very interesting. When you talk about conservatives in South Africa's political lingo, you are almost exclusively referring to white conservatives. You're referring to the Freedom Front. You're referring to a certain part of the Democratic Alliance. It's not assumed when you talk about conservatives that you are also including the massive amount of black conservatives in South Africa. And I think that's a grand shame. That's part of why we don't have this nice spread of political parties in our active politics, and rather have this massive lean towards the center left, and then also to the far left. So Action SA, I guess, I hope represents that, the possibility of that coming about. Now, of course, this is always subject to the fact that I despise what they stand for. I think it's absolutely horrifying. But not in the same way that the EFF is horrifying. It takes the pendulum all the way to the other side again. They have nice free market ideas on paper, which I can I guess congratulate whoever wrote that, for that, someone who has a good grasp of free market principles. But the Action SA vehicle is almost entirely driven and rigged towards scapegoating foreigners in South Africa, which I think is absolutely disgusting. Nothing going on in South Africa today, going wrong in South Africa today, is due to foreigners, whether they're here legally or illegally or whatever. That is, they play absolutely no role in the collapse. In the there's this idea going around that unemployment is so high in South Africa because we have so many undocumented foreigners. That's the reason. Absolute hogwash. If that is true, that undocumented foreigners are taking the majority of jobs, or I guess available spots in the informal economy, it is only because the ANC is still shepherding or stewarding insane labor laws that put employers in the position that they would want to hire undocumented immigrants. The source is not the fact that we have immigrants, illegal immigrants. Is the source is because we have these absolutely insane Scandinavian and French and German labor laws in an African country, on the low end, on a middle income African state. That it's bonkers. That is the reason why we have unemployment, and that is also the reason why foreigners find so many unregistered informal jobs at the expense of South Africans. So I find the Action SA's positioning on this to be very dishonest, because I know Herman Mashaba knows this. I know he knows this. He is not a stupid man. I know he knows what I just said is absolutely true, but he has hit a nerve uh, amongst many South Africans. And I say that Action SA might become the black conservative party, but there's a hell of a lot of white South Africans who think that this is the coming of Jesus in Herman Mashaba, which is wrong for all the same reasons. And it's this hate of foreigners, which just transcends any political issue seemingly in many countries in the world. The moment you can scapegoat foreigners, you're going to do well. So I despise Action SA's message in this regard, and I dare I say I despise Action SA's messaging in this regard. Worse, more than I despise the ANC. The the Action SA is doing to foreigners what the EFF does to white people. The ANC to a lesser extent, but they're still relatively moderate on that, I guess. So while I'm saying that Action SA has the potential to become this black conservative, to unite the black conservative bloc, it has that potential. It might absolutely not achieve that potential, but it has that potential to make black conservatives a functioning bloc in South Africa, a political bloc, which I think is good. I still think that what they propose is a problem, but they might really balance stuff out against the left, the very strong left wing bloc that's come around the ANC and the EFF. But again, I have no idea whether they will achieve this. To an extent, I really hope they achieve that. I think the sour taste that they leave in my mouth is probably worth worth us having that bloc united in South African politics. So that's my thoughts on Action SA. I guess some of my other thoughts on some of the smaller political parties is I'm unsure about how to feel about the DA again doing this. Never, don't dare vote for a small party. I find that to be very rich coming from a political entity that at one point had a single member of parliament, one person in parliament, and then grew from there and then went from strength to strength, and then in '94 collapsed, and then from there grew itself up into the official opposition in South Africa again. I think it's extremely unethical in a certain way for the DA to act like that never happened, as if it's always been this second largest, only alternative to the ANC that has ever existed in the history of South African politics. I think that's very dishonest. Then again, I'm I'm quite concerned about the National Democratic Revolution proving successful, and there might be something to be said for a unified, large political apparatus in the form of the DA getting temporarily maybe a large share of the opposition vote, maybe all the opposition vote, so that it can stave off this threat. I guess there is something to be said for that, but I would rather the DA said that rather than saying, "Oh, don't vote for a small party because it's just can never work." Stop doing that. So yeah, I guess I would say vote for whatever you want as long as it's not the ANC or the EFF. I'll take those two options off the table for you. You do not want to sink the country, so please pick another left-wing party other than them. There's a land party or something, so don't support them. But yeah, so I mean, in conclusion, I guess I'll obviously give Herman the last word, and I think that's I think that's fair enough. I defer so long as everyone knows I really defer to Herman when it comes to political analysis. Definitely, far has his finger far more on the pulse of what's going on the ground than I do. So yeah, thank you for that, Herman. It's always insightful to have these discussions with you. But I guess my final word is, to an extent, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier, and that is that meet up with your neighbors, meet up with your people who share your interests, your both your normative things that you're interested in and your economic interests, really, and start finding ways to make government irrelevant in your life. That is something that I think is going to be very crucial in the next few years in South Africa. I'm not a in Europe you have Eurosceptics. I'm not a South African skeptic. I don't think that the South African project is doomed or it should be doomed. I'm not a I don't want the project, the Rainbow Nation project, to collapse. I'm very much in favor of it. But to me, looking at our political situation, I see a dire situation, a dire thing developing. I'm not sure the electoral process is going to catch up to it in time. I think our economic situation is very dire. The amount of unemployed people in this country is incredibly concerning. I keep reading that it's the worst formal unemployment rate in the world, or something like that. That's people keep calling it a ticking time bomb, but it actually surprises me that the bomb hasn't gone off yet at this level. And I see that the deteriorating situation moving faster than our politics can keep up. We have elections every 5 years, municipal and national. I'm not sure the ballot box is going to keep up. So become a member of a community-based organization. I can very easily recommend Solidarity and AfriForum. Even in light of many of the differences I have with their some of the portions of their value statements, I think to a very large extent that they fill an incredibly important gap that is growing larger in South Africa, and that's a gap that does need to be filled. So become a member of those organizations, or if you have a local association, please do so. Um, uh, do not support state schools. If you can afford it, put your kids in a private school. The IRR is excellent project on critical race theory in schools. Is really, I think, increasingly going to draw attention to how our children are being indoctrinated, and that gets to a very low point in politics, in my estimation. And I think the only answer there is to withdraw completely from the system. Do not allow your children to be psychologically and emotionally abused in this way. Withdraw your support there. Withdraw your support from the state in any way that you can legally do. Do not ever give the state more money than you absolutely and legally have to. Do not voluntarily offer up your services to the state in any way. If you have the choice, please do not do business with the state. We deal with so many people who heart-wrenching stories of small business people being wiped out because the state does not pay after a service has been rendered to them. If you have any choice, do not do business with the state. Cut them off there. Now, that all being said, please vote. I am not against participation in the formal and the constitutional political system. I think that you need to do both things. The notion that we are so far gone that we should just focus on community initiative and forget about politics, that is very dangerous. That is extremely dangerous, because by in so doing, you allow the national democratic revolution to pick up speed and to destroy any community initiative you are building. So please do vote. I'm not saying that vote for any lofty goals or ideals. I'm saying vote in self-defense. Vote in defense of yourself and your community and your property and your liberty. Really, at the end of the day, just pick the least evil party you can think of and vote for them. And yeah, my final point is this, from me at least, this has been very cynical and negative, but absolutely never become a defeatist. That I despise defeatism, and I say this in many podcasts that I participate in. I'm picking up on a lot of defeatism amongst classical liberals, and liberals more broadly, but also amongst South Africans in general. Do not go there. The situation is not, and it will never be, so dire that we just have to roll over and die. Liberty is, I think, literally always within our grasp. All it needs is for us to reach out and take it. And that usually does not take a lot of effort, but it does take a conscious effort. So do not become defeatist. Get involved, write letters, talk to people, do exactly what Hermann said. Do not shy away from politics at the water cooler. Do not shy away from politics at the family dinner table. Talk to people, make your voice heard. And if a very small amount of people do that, I keep seeing this number, 3.5% of the politically active population. That is all you really need to drive sustainable change in society, and that really I would be surprised if we're not already almost there. All we need is a bit more conscious effort in a certain direction. So yeah, never throw your hands up in defeat. Defeat is not even close by. So don't let your mind go there. And of course, please support the Rational Standard. This is the RS podcast, after all. We try to be a voice for liberalism, for private, voluntary solutions to our most pressing problems. So if you can support us, support other organizations like the Rational Standard, you will be doing a huge service to the cause of freedom, and you will forestall the defeatist wave. And I implore you to please do that. Thank you.
I think Martin was as cynical as usual, but maybe that's just me being numb to it at this point. Hermann, you've got the final 3 minutes. Anything
Yeah, so first
to improve on what Martin said?
No.
Right.
But on
Okay,
another subject, on another subject, I just want to say the angry messages I sent to you has nothing to do with the fact that I don't get the last word. It's just because I'm an angry person and I've got your number. So please don't associate it with my don't associate it with my character. Just associate it with my personality. All right. So let me run through a few quick things. Action SA, I think, is doomed. I think it's dead on arrival. Martin mentioned Luyolo Mpiti. Now, Luyolo Mpiti was then a prominent DA youth member who tweeted out during the Schweizer incident, really fanning the flames of the alleged racist narrative. I happen to know the reason he did that was because white English men in the leadership roles of the party urged him to do that. One of those being now let me not name names. Now being key to Action SA's management. So if you want to connect the failure of Luyolo Mpiti, and then when it went south, he got a reward or a compensation by being moved really high up the candidate list to be assured a parliamentary seat. So that's dirty dealing politics. But the persons responsible for it are either no longer involved in the DA or involved in Action SA. So that narrative of race baiting based politics really runs in the organizational DNA of Action SA, I'm afraid. And full disclosure, I've been on the receiving end from this from Hermann Mashaba himself. When I went on television and I opposed BEE as he once did, he went after me on Twitter and called my parents white supremacists. It didn't. Then when I tried to, answer him by quoting Thomas Sowell at him, he just doubled down. Because, I'm such a massive white supremacist that I quoted one of the greatest free market economists who happened to be black. But, that's just the type of white supremacist I am. I've got a multicolored clan hood. I'm writing a musical. Andrew Lloyd Webber is not returning my calls. But the long and short of this is I think Action SA is doomed. I think it's poisoned from the start by a managerial misjudgment of race politics in South Africa, organizational misjudgment. Secondly, I think parties that start off with the leftovers or rejects of other parties do not do well. To quote a grand statesman of our time, they're not sending their best. Some of them, I assume, are good people, but they're not sending their best. So Action SA, I have very low hopes for. The poll Martin referred to, it's bogus. That's very, very sad, but you can't find the methodology anywhere. You can't find how they did it, where they did it. Someone from an opposing party sent me a WhatsApp saying, well, we can do a poll on WhatsApp and show we're going to get 93% of the polling, so of the support in Johannesburg. So Action SA, I've got very low hopes for. But as Martin points out, they might tap into a vein of public frustration with the status quo and with the establishment, the DA being seen as part of the establishment. If that happens, I don't think it'll last long, because I think this fundamental rot at its core will show over the next 5 years or whatever. So if it does well now and it does well in the 2024 general elections, I don't think it's sustainable. A bit like COPE wasn't sustainable because it was set up on a weak foundation. COPE was set up on a weak foundation ideologically and managerially, and Action SA the same. So that's Action SA. Then a few points that I want to actually just affirm.
Yeah, 2 minutes, Pretorius.
Okay, right. Okay. In 15th of August 1985, P.W. Botha, index finger in the air, made the Rubicon speech, where he doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down on apartheid, saying he will not lead white South Africans and other minorities down the road of abdication and suicide. Less than 10 years later, or less than a decade later, Nelson Mandela walks onto the pitch at Ellis Park with 40,000 Afrikaans white men chanting Nelson, Nelson, Nelson. Put the merit of it aside. Appreciate the massive paradigm shift that happened between 1985 and 1995. The greatest failure of defeatism is to accept that the paradigm, the status quo, is unassailable. It never is. It never is. The moment you buy into that, you get the type of politics we are facing now, where the Freedom Front Plus, the ACDP, COPE, where these parties that should be out in the country convincing South Africans that a different South Africa is possible are actually just trying to convince a few DA voters or a few ACDP voters to vote for them rather than the other opposition party. The moment you get nihilistic, defeatist, hopeless politics, you get into petty squabbling over a shrinking pie. And that's what's going on. And the DA is guilty of this as well. So don't buy into the defeatism, because that is absolutely a cause of bad politics. It's a cause of actual failure when the original basis for the defeatism is tenuous at best. So appreciate that 10-year spin. Imagine, just to put that into context, temporally, we are further away from the 2010 Soccer World Cup than the Rubicon speech and Ellis Park were from each other. And I remember the 2010 Soccer World Cup like it was just the other day. So appreciate a 10-year time space is a massive amount of time for the paradigm, the status quo, to crumble and to crumble into its, insert appropriate swear word. But the thing is, it's a bit like Hemingway said about bankruptcy. How do you go bankrupt? Well, at first very slow and then suddenly all at once. Another thing that I want to, and this is perhaps what I leave you with, because listen to Martin, and I did, where he might defer to the trivialities of political safari watching. To me, I defer to him in terms of the fundamental understanding of freedom and liberalism and property rights, and I take the compliments I receive from him and I give it back to him, because I believe in property rights.
Okay.
Enough
of the both of you.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, you can't deny our love. But then the final point that I will leave people with is this: if every person that in 2019 voted against the ANC or the EFF went out in the next 2 weeks and found one person, just one, who did not vote in the previous election and convinced them to vote in this election for any party other than the ANC and the EFF, there's a new majority coalition the next day. We have 36 million people who can vote, 27 million of them registered to vote, 17 million of them pitch up to vote, and then of that 17 million, about 11 million vote for the ANC EFF. If everyone who voted DA, Freedom Front Plus, COPE, Achang, whoever, just find one person and take them to the ballot box with you, the change is instant. Don't underestimate the potency of that. But resignation, defeatism, that's the worst thing possible that you can fall into now. So go out and vote. And if you care about South Africa, and I mean, you're 2 hours into this podcast, you bloody well should at this stage, take someone with you. do go to the trouble of that. Once every few years, put on your to-do list for the day, find non-voter, convince them to become voter. It really starts with that. Chris, Martin, on that, I'm going to shut up for a change.
No better note on which to end. I have to thank both of you for more than 2 hours of your time. Otherwise, it just would have been me trying to proselytize about Ayn Rand or something. So thank you both very much for that.
We saved people. We saved RS listeners a hell of a lot of suffering.
There we go. Exactly. To the listeners, we of course hope you enjoyed this discussion and found it insightful. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the RS channel wherever you're listening to this, be it on YouTube or on other podcast apps. Also, make sure that you check out the Rational Standard every day if you don't yet. We also recommend, if possible, please support organizations such as the Free Market Foundation, the RR, AfriForum, Solidariteit, Sakeliga. Do your bit, as Martin mentioned, and hopefully we can start pushing South Africa in a better direction. But until next time, good luck for the elections. We'll probably talk to you after that. Until then, take care and have a great week forward. Take care. Bye.